We keep having folks kind of slowly filter in, but we'll go ahead and get started for the day with our Brownfield Understanding and Navigating the Fiscal Year 26 Brownfields Solicitation. Um, Title really rolls off the tongue, it grabs you. So thank you for being here today with us. My name is Tyler McDaniel. I work at Blueprint Kentucky and doing a variety of community development, community planning activities. And I am here today with one of our partners in one of those programs, Kiersten O'Leary. And this webinar series, the Brownfield Redevelopment webinar series, is part of that collaboration where we offer monthly sort of resource sharing and informational sessions around brownfields, um, some of the more sort of technical and nuanced stuff around funding, as well as case studies and other sorts of adjacent examples of brownfields planning. So we appreciate y'all being here with us today. So that's me. I will hand it over to Kiersten to introduce herself.
And I'm Kiersten O'Leary. I'm the Kentucky Brownfield Program Coordinator with the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection. And we're here today just to kind of walk through the fiscal year Brownfield solicitation and kind of what all is entailed with that and try to offer a few resources. I know that several of you on the call probably participated in EPA's webinars that happened last week specific to the type of grant that you're, wanting to apply for. But we hope that this can be kind of a more conversational approach to some of the same information and offer in kind of what services that both Blueprint Kentucky and our program have kind of as you're walking through this process.
Yes, I appreciate you mentioning those um, webinars from last week, Kirsten, I think will be a really good sort of additional resource to our webinar. Those focused a little bit more on just the specifics of that notice of funding, as far as the narrative sections for each one of the notice of fundings go. So definitely check those out as well. But we will dig in. So you may know this already since you're here, but just to reiterate, of what is a brownfield. So kind of this definition at the top, the very official definition of how it is defined as a real property, the expansion, the redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or further defines the term to include a site that is contaminated by a controlled substance, contaminated by petroleum or petroleum product excluded from the definition of hazardous substance or mine-scarred land. So that's a lot, right? But essentially, at their core, brownfields are contaminated or potentially contaminated properties. And I want to encourage y'all in thinking about this to really sort of hone in on and lean into the potential for contamination and the underutilized component of this, and kind of recognize that brownfields, while there may be a stigma around them, can be anything as simple as lead and asbestos to anything, that is more of a legacy contaminant from old industry or petroleum, things like that. So there is kind of a broad definition at play when we talk about brownfields here. So the funding. This year is the final year to apply for the historic levels of brownfield funding that sort of came about under the what was it, the
Bipartisan
Bipartisan
Infrastructure Law.
Infrastructure
Yep.
Law, or I always get it mixed up with the IRA
Yeah,
and
it's
the
IIJA, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Those are one and the same. So yeah, that's the where this funding is coming from. More funding than the Brownfield program has seen in years past. Are we
I don't know
experiencing
where.
some technical difficulties?
I think we are. I don't know where my screen went.
Oh, there you go.
Okay,
We're
there we
back.
go. So yeah, within that funding, there are a multitude of partners. So state partners, federal partners, and the technical assistance or brownfield providers all have additional resources during this time. So some of that is, folks on this call like Kirsten, um, and can provide some various kind of programmatic and technical assistance supports for these applications and for the process itself throughout the year. This round of applications, of course, due on January 28th. So we got a little bit of time, but definitely still imperative to really get going on everything. Um, the anticipated selections for that, once you submit in January, the notifications will come in June of 26, and then the funds themselves will be awarded in the fall of 26. And some of the offerings for this year include kind of your classic that, have been around for all the years of this funding, the multi-purpose, the assessment, and then the cleanup grants. There are some nuanced differences that we'll get into along with these as well. And once again, the project period, either 4 or 5 years across each of these grants, and it kind of depends on which one you're going for.
And then I just wanted to highlight that everything that you're going to need for this solicitation for this upcoming grant opportunity is at that link below, that EPA Mark grant application resources link. It's where all of the FAQs are, where the solicitations are, where all of the webinars that they've done on kind of the threshold and the narrative and all of the minimum grant requirements are at that link. So if you have any questions about where to find anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Or to EPA Region 4, they would certainly be able to point you in the direction of anything that you're, looking for. See. Here we go. Okay, so we just wanted to highlight again some Kentucky successes that have come about since the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding. And these are all cleanup grant applications that have been awarded. But I don't want to, I also want to highlight that there are lots of cities across the state and area development districts that have been very successful with assessment grants as well. And I know, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but just a couple on that page. The Hayeswood Hospital in Maysville, Kentucky received $2 million for a lead and asbestos abatement. That is currently ongoing. There was $1 million recently awarded to the former Barlow School in Ballard County. So we've had, quite a bit of success on a national stage for Brownfield funding, like I said, at the national level that have been awarded. I think it was last year, we received the highest cleanup grant in EPA Region 4, which is basically Kentucky all the way down to Florida and all of those states. That, the $5 million for the former CSX rail yard in urban Kentucky. And Tyler just texted me. I apologize. His computer is having some technical difficulties. Let me see if there's any way. Oh, you've got it switched. Okay, perfect. So as far as the eligibility is concerned, really, if you're a general purpose of unit of local government, so a city or a county, quasi-governmental entities like your area development districts, your industrial development authorities, entities like that, or a 501c3 nonprofit, you all are eligible to receive this grant funding for this opportunity. I would check, obviously, the solicitations by each of, because these can vary a little bit by grant type. Like, to be eligible for a cleanup grant, you have to own the site and be what we call a bona fide prospective purchaser, or have some exemption to that if you're applying. And then I'm not going to go through all of this with you all, but I just wanted to show you that that same link, the EPA Mark Grant Application Resources link, has these eligibility charts. So this one is like if you're a single entity and you're wanting to apply for multiple different types of grants, like if you want to apply for an assessment grant and a cleanup grant, then you can use this chart to see if that's okay or not. So in this instance, it looks like you can apply for both a community-wide assessment grant and a cleanup grant all in the same fiscal year. That one's a yes, but all of the other ones, you can just use that matrix to see which ones you're eligible to apply for. And then on the next slide, that one is for existing grant recipients. So if you currently have an assessment grant and you're wanting to apply for a cleanup grant, or you have an assessment grant and you're wanting to apply for another assessment grant, that's just telling you kind of based on where you're at in the process. Most of them are, you must draw down 70% of your existing grant to be eligible to apply for another one. So just wanted to let you know that those are available.
And yeah, definitely utilize those tables. If you're like me, I'm very much a visual learner, so those are incredibly helpful for sorting through this, really meaty information in this notice of funding. So within that, in order to apply for any of these grants, you have to first meet this threshold criteria. So the threshold criteria meaning that even to be eligible for review, you have to meet all of these. And there are some nuances across each of the grants, and those kind of also dovetail with how many applications that you can apply for. Some of the projects based on eligibility, you may only be able to apply with for one of these Brownfields grants, where additional ones you could apply for more than one for potentially an assessment grant and a multi-purpose or something like that. So the threshold criteria has to be included as an attachment to the narrative criteria, which we will talk about a little bit more in a second, and kind of get into the meat of what goes into the narrative criteria. And these, once again, they are different for each grant. Um, so pay close attention to that and the nuance in that. But applicant eligibility, clearly defined properties or target areas, and the community pieces are going to be universal across each of the grants as far as the threshold criteria goes. So just be sure you're hitting those major pieces as you get into this. And once again, there are some kind of more robust EPA resources about some of these grant requirements, about some other presentations. Those are hyperlinked in here. So whenever you get all of this information in your follow-up email, we encourage you to click around in the presentation and find some of those hyperlinks and utilize those resources. And of course, as with any federal grant, you're going to want to be sure that your grants.gov account is active, since that is where you will apply, as well as having that UEI number through sam.gov. If you do not have a UEI number, I would get on that as soon as possible. Those can take, 2 to 4 weeks to sort out. So you'll want to get ahead of that and get your number so you can apply by that late January deadline. And then alongside of the threshold criteria, we have the narrative and scoring criteria, which we're going to really break down in depth in a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to touch on it here as far as that criteria, depending on the grant, tends to be 10 to 12 pages, and you're going to see it broken down by these four ranking criteria sections here at the bottom: project area revitalization plan, community need and engagement, task description, cost measuring progress, programmatic capability, and past performance. So that's the stuff we're going to get into a little more deeply here in a minute. But each one of those sections is going to have it's going to be scored based on points, and we'll have some kind of cheat sheets to send that are a little shorter as far as like the descriptions of each of those and how many points they're all worth. That is all available in the notice of funding opportunity. But just bear in mind those point sections, and those can really help guide your application.
And as far as changes for this year, so every year EPA publishes a document that details the changes of the solicitation for each grant type from year to year. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those. There is a new template for the NOFO that is in accordance with, the uniform standards that they now have to do. So that it looks a little bit different. There is an alignment with administration priorities and executive orders. So some things that you would have seen in last year's application, kind of like the more environmental justice focus, that kind of thing, those will not be in the current version of the solicitation. Those changes provide some additional clarification. And one of the major high points that we have involvement in that I wanted to highlight is that for cleanups for the past couple of years, we as the state regulatory agency have had to make a determination on whether or not your site was sufficiently characterized. So they've taken away that requirement. So we do not have to make that determination this year. The applicant, you as the applicant, if you're, applying for a cleanup grant, you are the one that has to say, yes, this site is sufficiently characterized, like it's had enough environmental testing done to know how much you're actually going to have to clean up and what you're going to have to do. But if there is more assessment that's going to be needed before you can fully implement the grant, you do have a little bit of wiggle room there, and you'll have to attest that all of the, characterization and more environmental site assessments will be performed by June 15th, 2026. So that gives you a little bit of leeway there. And then there is a link to that, page that I just mentioned that, outlines all of the guidance changes from last year. And then this is just another version of the chart that EPA shared in their webinars last week. And it's just detailing the amount of funding that's available this year. And I will say that, a majority of the funding for this year is coming from that IIJA Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funds. You'll see that the 58 million over to the right is just what's from the regular appropriations. So just be mindful of that. I think prior to the bipartisan infrastructure law, the highest amount that you could apply for a cleanup grant was $500,000. So this year, the last year, we have an opportunity to apply for up to $4 million for cleanup. So those bigger sites or kind of that legacy contamination that we're talking about, this is a great year to get in on some of this funding, especially because if you'll notice the estimated number of awards, they're doing two levels of cleanup. So one is between 0 and 500,000, and one is between 500,000 and 1 and 4 million. And they're only anticipating 10 of the 500,000 awards nationally. They're anticipating up to 26 of the up to $4 million awards. So they're hoping to kind of push this money out and be able to provide the necessary funding to clean up as many of those big sites as possible. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that difference. You can kind of, this changes from year to year on the estimated number of awards, and it also changes as to what they actually fund depending on the quality of applications that they get. But just keep in mind that the ones with a smaller estimated number of awards are likely to be a little bit more competitive than the ones with kind of that higher number. And just as a reminder, this is the last year that there will be no cost share on these grants. So there's no match, no cost share. So take advantage of that while you can, especially for really all of the grant areas, but assessment grants, cleanups, all of those used to have a cost share, and that's been waived for the last 5 years under the bipartisan infrastructure law.
So, as we mentioned within the different types of grants, assessment grants are kind of, as the name implies, they can fund an assessment of your community assets, your properties, your buildings. So, what that entails is funding for inventories, for planning around those inventories, both short and long range, environmental assessments themselves, and community outreach, which, as we mentioned earlier, is a huge component of all this. So those assessment grants they come in two different types. So the community-wide assessment, sort of your classic assessment grant of being when you're in those beginning phases of addressing challenges. But they can also, be applicable for communities that have ongoing productive reuse efforts. So if you already have sort of planning that's in motion, or you're kind of looking for more properties and different, you know, parts of your county or your town or your region, and then the assessment coalition, which is more of a partnership grant. So you'll have one lead entity who partners with 2 to 4 entities. And that is sort of works in a way that the 2 to 4 entities might be a little smaller, might not have the capacity to apply and manage their own EPA grants. And there are a lot of sort of nuances about those partnerships and the notice of funding and who can take that lead entity position. And sort of some stuff like the target areas must be defined for each entity and they cannot overlap. So you could have, 2 entities maybe in an area development district, but they have to represent different counties. So that can be a really great way to kind of partner across a broad geographic area. And some of the eligible activities we're going to get into here are they come in 2 phases. First, we're going to talk about initiate revitalization, and then the second batch is eligible activities to prepare sites for reuse. So these are things that you can do under the assessment grant. So you're going to see here there's a whole bunch of different sorts of planning and assessment tools, things like area-wide planning that identifies your cleanup and reuse opportunities for those key sites. So when you're thinking about your target areas, you are going to want to identify those key sites that we often call your catalyst sites that can sort of be the major hinge points that maybe everything else might come from, almost like a domino effect. And then some of these other assessments are variously nuanced as far as like the site reuse may do a full evaluation of the planning opportunities around a site and some of the challenges that you might face, whereas a land use assessment may look more at the land itself, being able to find incentives or other sorts of resources that you could stack for redevelopment, while targeting some of those potential reuses. And then some more sort of economically oriented pieces like a market study, or an economic feasibility study, things, whatever language you'd like to use, that will sort of give you kind of dollar amounts and trends and data-driven information about how feasible your reuse might be, and particularly around your end use for that site. We also have infrastructure evaluation, community health assessment, site disposition strategy. So once again, just kind of various plans that you can utilize. I really want to draw some attention to the community health assessment as well, especially as we talk about contamination, and community health assessments, can help maybe draw a correlation between the specific public health issues faced by residents like within an area who may have been impacted by this sort of long-term contamination, and how you can use that to strengthen health outcomes, to make the area, the target area, the neighborhood a little more vibrant, healthy, and understanding what those issues even are before we can begin. But beyond that, we have the preparing sites for reuse as well. And this is, the preparation, the visioning, the dreaming part of it. So getting to that kind of planning piece of, really sketching out the community plans or the potential designs for your target areas, for your specific catalyst sites, and then developing the plans within that. So those plans could be something like a roadmap, like where you're just sort of drawing upon your assets, trying to better understand the different resources, the different funding, the different methods that you can go about to strategically revitalize some of these areas. Or it could be a deeper sort of revitalization plan, one that really leans into those community pieces we talked about earlier, while also kind of teasing out the feasibility and best use of the site long term. Once again, factoring in cost, benefit to the community long term, leaning rather on the fact that that these sites will be redeveloped to serve community need. So really kind of getting into the meat of plan development with some of these. Um, and then once again, more of the sort of the market-based economic components of cleanup and of reuse. So that piece of the market viability, who are sort of the outside interest as far as developers, or maybe it's a tourism initiative or any of that kind of stuff. Or how will this, impact your local economy through job creation, through projected tax in the long term, things like that. So really getting into that nitty gritty piece of that that a lot of funders and developers like to see. They like to see dollar signs, right? So you can kind of use some of this money to help inform some of that.
And then cleanup grants. So, well, first I want to say, make sure to look at all of those eligible planning activities and what's available. I think it's best case scenario if you're able to articulate kind of which of those you need in your application. Because if I'm not mistaken, you have to have that kind of put in your application for you to be able to take advantage of those things. So definitely give that some thought as to which of those might work best for your community and your situation, and then try to write that into the application as best as you can. Moving over into cleanup. Cleanup grants provide funding for eligible entities to carry out cleanup activities on brownfield sites. And like I mentioned at the beginning, an applicant must own the site for which it's requesting funding. So the date on the deed has to be before that January 28th, 2026 deadline. So again, those historical sites that have been waiting a long time, that weren't feasible in the past, that now are, because there's $4 million worth of cleanup funding potentially on the table for you to take advantage of. Make sure we're taking a look at those. And there is a deadline for the community notification about those cleanup sites. I believe they have to be able to comment on a draft analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, and the date on that is January 14th. So keep in mind that cleanup grants are a little bit more involved when we're talking about just deadlines and making sure that community notification deadline and everything has been met. Brownfield sites where brownfield cleanup funding, EPA brownfield cleanup funding were previously expended. Like if you've gotten a grant before from EPA brownfields, you cannot receive additional cleanup grant funding for that site. That being said, if you have taken advantage of our revolving loan fund program, our Cleaner Commonwealth Fund, by either a sub-grant or a loan, you are still eligible to apply for EPA cleanup grant funding. So just wanted to make that clarification. And then, as a lot of you all probably know, the cleanup grants, when we're talking about brownfield cleanup, we're strictly talking about the remediation piece of it, the actual cleanup of the environmental contaminants. But in some instances, EPA will pay for construction or demolition, if that's how it works out. It's kind of like, if there's asbestos containing materials in the roof and they have to get rid of the roof, then they're not going to leave the building without a roof, right? So those kinds of activities where there is construction or alteration or repair, just want you all to know that those are subject to Davis-Bacon, as well as the Build America, Buy America provisions, just so you're aware.
And then the multi-purpose grants are, let's say you've got an area, you've got some potential sites, you've done some community engagement around it, and now you're ready to kind of tackle it with a multi-pronged approach. These are the grants that maybe for you as far as being a broader scope as for assessment or cleanup, um, and doing additional kind of planning activities and continuing to solicit community input and figure out, community priority within some of these sites. So you will, within the multipurpose grant, need to articulate, pretty precisely how these funds are going to result in moving all these things forward into a phase two site assessment, into cleanup, overall revitalization, having a feasible reuse plan. And when you are applying for a multi-purpose grant and thinking about your target area, this is for an area that is a little more precise. So earlier I used that example of a more of a regional approach, whereas this one is you have to have pretty distinct neighboring areas. So thinking about neighborhoods that are close to one another, sites that are all kind of in the same town, or maybe like an old industrial district that has a lot of sites that could all use remediation, potentially use remediation, or that kind of like, the shared sense of geography and living. Um, and the applicant must own at least one of the sites in the target area in order to move forward with that grant. So this could be a really good option if you've done a little work already and are ready to kind of just, you're feeling a little solid in that and want to kind of launch forward across multiple activities. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the narrative and scoring criteria, which once again, you have to pass the threshold criteria to even be considered, right? But to get back to this component, we're going to dig in a little more deeply into these four ranking criteria sections. So we're going to start it off by talking about project area and revitalization plans. Once again, want to remind you that the scoring varies between each of the grants, and that the scores that you see in these examples that we're about to show may not sort of accurately reflect whatever individual grant that you're deciding to go for. So keep that in mind. And once again, we'll have some resources for you to better look at the points here in the future. So within the project area and plans for revitalization, fuzzy slide here, you can see these three main components. And these are largely the same across each one of the grants. It's just that the points might shift a little. And I think that there are some differences in a couple of them. They might have like a little bonus section, like the cleanup grants, I think ask for an additional sort of reuse plan in one of these areas. But so yeah, this component largely dealing with defining your target area. What is your reuse strategy? How are you going to leverage resources? So once again, this one's taken that very kind of targeted place-based approach and helping you kind of really just tell the story of your target area. What it was, what it is, what it could be, and how are you going to do that on the ground? What are those resources you're going to leverage? The monetary resources as well as, the labor resources and sort of the social pieces as well as you're forming partnerships.
And then, so for community need and engagement, this is where we're talking about, this is where you're telling your story. This is where you're saying, my community has X amount of brownfields that really need some attention, revitalization of those areas. Last year, again, there was that focus on that small population, low income, and these are screen grabs from last year. So, but just also the community engagement. This is where you're identifying partners and stakeholders that are going to be involved in your project, and how you plan to communicate that project progress with the local community. So a lot of times people will, put that information on their websites or create, a whole social media dedicated um, to community engagement centered around the actual Brownfield grant. And also one thing I wanted to mention here is sometimes it's a requirement to have like a specific kind of organization as a partner. I know in the past they have wanted you to have at least one community-based organization per target area. And so if it's asking for a community-based organization, make sure you identify that specifically. Even if you need to put like CBO in parentheses after the name, just so they know when they're reviewing all of these that you've met that requirement.
Yeah, and a little bit more on this sort of community need and engagement piece. I like to think of this as this is your big pitch, that's going to really frame how you're going to work with people in your place to get this stuff done. That the partnerships piece, can help kind of frame and set the tone of your proposal. And we'll get a little bit more into this data piece later, but I think this is also a good place, along with your target area, to use some of your demographic, your economic, your quality of life data, to really tell your story, to talk about, population trends and population shifts in an area, or maybe economic shifts. Um, and then also, thinking about engagement, how are you going to involve locals? In whatever part of the process you're in. This is something we at Blueprint Kentucky can kind of give, some best practices on and help you with a little bit as far as those facilitation pieces of how do we get perspective on what this should be? How does it kind of dovetail with other plans that our community might already have? And if we don't have those plans, how can we kind of use this to also march towards them? And once again, what are the gaps between what is in the community currently and what the greatest needs are? Is the greatest need housing? Is it a healthcare center? Things like that. Um, so once again, thinking about the ways that working with the residents of the places that you live can play into larger revitalization efforts. Because not only is it great for this grant and is a high point need, but will also just help to sort of foster goodwill in your project long term.
And then, so this third major section is task descriptions, costs, and then measuring progress. I will say that a lot of this information, if you're working with an environmental consultant to help develop your application, they can be very helpful in these because they're talking about the cost, like how much does a phase one cost? How much does a phase two cost? How many of each of those are you going to do? And what's realistic for your grant. Again, like with the cleanup, that was mainly focusing on assessment, but for cleanup, how much is it going to cost to remediate this 5,000 square foot old school? There are just a lot of nuances there and things that you may have to consult with an environmental professional on to be able to give you those numbers, as well as your plan to track and measure that progress and all of the outcomes and outputs that you're going to have to report on to EPA throughout the grant period. So make sure that, especially if you're talking about a cleanup project, that you're getting accurate information and costs from environmental professionals on that work. And then I also just wanted to mention that we have resources available. I have passed successful applications dating back really the last 10 years or so, but especially over the last couple of years, I have successful applications that have been submitted and awarded that I'm happy to send out. If you just send me an email, I think we have our contact information listed at the end of the presentation, but also just our regular Brownfields email is just brownfields@ky.gov. So if you would like to see any of those previous successful applications that you may be able to get a good idea of, hey, what's a reasonable amount of phase ones to do? What's a reasonable amount of phase twos to do? You can take a look at that. And then I just wanted to mention that cleanup grants also have a proposed cleanup grant or cleanup plan in this section. Is kind of like how you're going to tackle the contamination for the intended reuse of the property. And all of that is most likely outlined in your ABCA document that I mentioned earlier, the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. There are higher standards for cleanup for like a residential development than there would be for an industrial or commercial. So in those documents, they're detailing kind of, based on the intended reuse, we think this is the best option for remediation. And so that's what you're going to detail kind of in that cleanup plan.
And then the final section here, programmatic capability. So this is all about your organization. Um, the first component, programmatic capability, is just kind of what they really want to know about the structure of your organization, of your partnerships, are there contractors? Will there be subrecipients? So really just kind of outlining, you know, that y'all have the capacity to do this, and that, you have a full, robust team who can handle the administration of these types of grants. And then the second one being past performance and accomplishments. So while it mentions asking if you've ever had a brownfield grant there, which is, great if you have and incredibly helpful. Uh, I would also articulate any other sorts of federal grants you've had. And if you have not had federal grants, try to find other sources of funding to lean on, because you won't be entirely penalized for not having this. There is more information about that, like in sort of the specifics of scoring itself, about kind of alternatives to these sections if you've never received before. So if you haven't and that was stressing you out, don't stress, don't worry. There's some nuance to this, but this section largely just sort of articulating, that once again that you can administer the grant, and this is how this is evidence that you can.
Yes, and then also, that programmatic capability piece, I just want to mention that the first three sections are scored by, people on committees that may not have any familiarity with your state, like our state or your city, and that may not even really be like from the Brownfield program. They may not even really know what a brownfield is. So make sure that you're putting things into terms that, everyone can understand, and that, you have somebody maybe that's not as familiar with brownfields from your organization that reads over it and says, yes, this makes sense to me. And then also the programmatic capability piece. So this section 4, if you already have some kind of familiarity with EPA or a past EPA brownfield grant, that programmatic capability section will be scored at EPA Region 4 by, whoever might have the most familiarity with your past performance. So make sure that whatever you're putting in your past performance and accomplishments, especially as it relates to a previous brownfield grant, previous or existing brownfield grant, make sure that whatever you're putting in your application is accurate, and that everything that you have put in there is already in the acres database that the APA has. Because they will cross-reference all of that and make sure that everything is as you're saying it in the application.
Yes, thank you for that. It's a very good reminder. And so that sort of wraps like our official talk about the this notice of funding and solicitation itself. But I want to just kind of um, drive a few points home within this, that Brownfield's revitalization, the successful revitalization, comes about seeing these properties not as liabilities, but as opportunities. So I think the Maysville piece is a great example of a building that had been abandoned for 40 years, that, they never, well, that they didn't, I guess in some ways it was a liability, but that it wasn't necessarily something that was going to defeat the community. But that it could instead be something that could be a rallying cry for the community, something that was a familiar historic space that could fill a community need, and a community need that can also encourage these three things here: economic development, blight reduction, and community revitalization. So seeing these sites not as liabilities, not as just things that we need to wash ourselves of as communities, and sometimes, maybe that is the only option is to get rid of it, but that a lot of times these can be, once again, catalysts for broader redevelopment. And once again, focusing on those priority sites, those catalyst sites. Think about your potential end uses at the beginning and lean on, once again, those pre-existing plans, whether that is, a short range or a long range strategic plan or comprehensive plan. Maybe you have a community health needs assessment or some housing needs that are articulated through official plans that you have or through some broader data sets. So those types of things can really help to kind of to shape your narrative, to shape how ready you are and the roadmap to completion, and can also help you really fine tune, hone in on the funding sources. Think about stacking resources once you have a good idea of all the components and the needs within that. And once again, as Kiersten alluded to earlier, brownfield grants, they can't provide funding to do a complete redevelopment and a total overhaul, but that they do involve several stages, and that each phase within that is going to require significant resources and effort within the brownfields component and even beyond. So while it cannot provide a complete redevelopment, it can be really beneficial to get a clean bill of health for a building, to do the cleanup. And that can be really appealing to whether that is a developer or a financier. When you present a building that says, "Hey, this thing is completely cleaned out, the bones are good, it's healthy, it is not a risk, go forth." That can be really appealing to know that a developer or a financier will not have to put forth that upfront cost for cleanup. And consider, these things take a really long time, and every step is momentum, even no matter how small it feels. And momentum builds over time. And please do not get discouraged on the timeline of these projects. They are very big, they're very labor intensive. But if you're patient and see the course, it can be a really beautiful, transformative thing for your community. And to that piece again about resources and the ways that brownfields cannot cover everything. This is why it's so important every step of the way to identify and leverage those resources. And whether that's, grant funding or loans or sort of partnerships with, investors or nonprofits or community groups or whatever, really thinking about those resources, and how critically important they are to making these projects happen. Um, and especially true in communities that are smaller, that don't have, great economic means like some places. Maybe there isn't a vibrant commercial corridor, but you see these sites as having the potential to start that sort of commercial corridor or to attract more industry to the area through this reuse. That leveraging these resources and having solid partnerships can be crucial in those types of communities. So really, really try to hone in on those every step of the way from your initial sort of dreaming and brainstorming through your cleanup and forming your partnerships into your end use that you have been thinking about the whole time. So also sometimes there may not be an economic return or a revenue. If you have a site that is going to be transformed into a public park or some maybe downtown green space, um, those indirect benefits are also really important and can be projected in different ways, especially as we're talking about community health, we talk about quality of life and all these things, really articulating some of this need for spaces for people to gather, for trees, for flood mitigation, for whatever that those types of spaces can be, that there are broader sort of benefits to community that are not economic. And that consultants can be hired to help kind of roadmap using the assessment grants. So if you if you have a consultant in mind or an idea that you would love additional perspective on, you can utilize them in that way. And as you're working through that narrative criteria, make sure your grant tells a compelling story. Once again, thinking about that reuse from the very beginning, how will this lead to broader revitalization? How will it tie into pre-existing plans? Understand and capitalize upon that review criteria as far as thinking of it as a storytelling tool and using data to strengthen that case and project what those outcomes could be. And I'm going to share some data sources from us at Blueprint Kentucky here in a minute that you can really lean into. And we have a lot of great resources around how to tell stories with data as well. And once again, I want to reiterate this point that Kiersten made that the reviewer may have no idea, no reference point to the area you're talking about or the sites that you're talking about. So really using this stuff to paint a vivid portrait of the place that you live and of the sites is crucial. So try to make it relatable in those ways that we all sort of yearn for as far as vibrant, healthy, economically prosperous communities.
So I'll jump in here and just tell you just a little bit about our office. We offer, so all like an assessment grant is really just a large amount of targeted brownfield assessments or environmental site assessments done kind of in a targeted way. But we have those available year round. We have funding available for those now to do those phase ones, phase twos, hazardous building material surveys, those kinds of things. So if there's a priority project within your community that can't wait for this funding cycle, or if you apply and then are not funded, I would encourage you to apply site by site through our targeted brownfield assessment program. We also have low to no, mainly no interest loans through our Cleaner Commonwealth Fund. And there is a little bit of funding available right now for brownfield cleanup projects. So it's not unlike the EPA cleanup grant process. A lot of the documentation is the same, and it is a loan that you have to pay back, but you only have to pay back 75% of it. There is a 25% forgiveness, and it is 0% interest over 15 years. And then as far as liability relief goes, when you're looking at acquiring a piece of property that is potentially a brownfield, we do offer liability protections through our 415 liability relief program to those potential purchasers of brownfield sites or purchasers that have kind of gone through this process the right way, right? Like you had a phase one in the appropriate timeline prior to purchasing the site. And so we can help assist with some of that. There are also tax incentives available, both the decontamination tax credit and our regular brownfield tax credit. But both of those cannot be used if there was some kind of grant funding element, to your project. So if there's any interest in any of those things, feel free to, give us a call or reach out via email. I also wanted to mention that everybody that is applying for EPA brownfield grant funding this year is required to get a letter of support from our office. And that is just, EPA's way of making sure that we're involved and that we know who's going to be applying this cycle. There will certainly not be any issues with getting that letter of support to you. So again, that brownfield email or my email, I can send you the form to request that document back and have that letter to you pretty quickly. So feel free, to reach out, make sure that you remember that that's a requirement, that it's an attachment to your grant application.
And I'm going to share a couple more resources here, probably pretty quick since I know we're close to time, but I want to just touch on this, the Revitalization Ready Handbook. This is a really great guide that kind of talks about a lot of these plans, and kind of walks you through the process of going from understanding the needs of your community, all the way through to how do you implement these things and how do you create the plans and the benchmarks along the way. And if you just look at this graph here, you can see so many of these different components that we've talked about today, particularly some of the plans that are eligible activities, as well as some of the pieces of the narrative criteria. This is a really robust document that's available on the EPA website. It's really great. I highly recommend it, even beyond brownfields, as far as thinking about how to turn community need into action and implementation. There is an older workbook that I don't think is used anymore, but I think
Yeah,
we
it's
have a
like an
copy
Excel
of.
document that we have a copy of that we would, it basically breaks down all of the sections in the revitalization ready guide, like the site inventory. It kind of has a tab specifically for that and kind of all the things that you would want to know as you're collecting a brownfield inventory in your community. So feel free, we can send that Excel document out if you all want it.
Yeah. So just ask us for that if you're interested, and definitely check this out. Also, I want to point you towards some of our Blueprint Kentucky data that we have here. This first hyperlink of the data profiles is the screenshot you see over here, and this can be divided, or it is divided rather, through a number of different impact areas. So workforce, economy, like all kinds of stuff, healthcare. And you can, as you see, choose your county at the top at that drop down. This is really great for kind of illustrating the way that things have changed over time, as well as the present conditions in your community. I'm happy to do a more in-depth walkthrough with anyone who wants to do that. We also have some older resources like presentations and webinars about that I can point you towards. And also the community needs assessment. This was done by UK, by the extension offices around the state. So it essentially compiles the greatest need for each county based on survey data and input given by community members and extension professionals. So that's also a really good piece for articulating need in your community. I'm also happy to help walk you through that. And then some other components here you might know about. Once again, our Brownfields webinar archive hyperlinked, newsletters, that I put out and that Kiersten puts out. We'll have all kinds of updates, trainings, webinars. We do have a few upcoming opportunities. We'll be doing a grant review for these specific Brownfields grants. That will be January 14th and 15th. It'll be virtual. We'll send out a link in the follow-up email with a sign up. So you can just sign up for a time if you want us to review your application. And you don't have to do that immediately, but those times are available. So just, let us know. We'll also be doing a webinar at some point in January, TBD. Keep your eyes on the newsletters, where we kind of break down the Federal Resource Guide, which is a document that talks about how different types of federal funding can be used with one another. So being able to stack funding and think long term about how you might be able to use different funding sources. And then the NJIT, they are the Region 4 technical assistance providers. So they also offer grant review services, and we'll be doing a virtual grant writing workshop on the 17th of this month. So just, a little over a week away.
Yeah, so we will, in the follow-up email, we'll send out the link to those upcoming opportunities for sure. If you need a letter of support, please let me know. If there's anything else, I know EPA can't answer a lot of questions right now that the solicitation is out. So if you need copies of previous applications that were successful, or if you have any questions that our office can help with, feel free to reach out. My email's there. Again, the regular, just general Brownfields emails, brownfields@ky.gov. Pretty simple. Appreciate everyone joining us today, and certainly wish you all luck in submitting applications. I would say this fall. It's so weird that the timing is different this year with the shutdown and everything. But good luck in your solicitations this winter.
Yeah, and apologies that we went to Tom and didn't get to any questions. I'm happy to stick around if anyone has questions. But if you have any that come up later, feel free to email and we'll get those answered for you. But if not, you all have a great day, week, and keep an eye out for our follow-up emails.